Okay, guys, thank you very much for joining us tonight in School of Mitzvot. We'd like to thank our host, Mr. and Mrs. Rabin Saidian. Chazakim u'bruchim. Thank you very much for opening up your doors to us tonight. Hashem, may your house always be full of smachot, happy occasions, and shiurim and mitzvot and wonderful things.
Amen.
And we're learning tonight L'ilui Nishmat, Mr. Saidian's father, Menashe ben Chanoch of blessed memory. May his neshama go higher and higher in Gan Eden. All right. So we're learning Parashat Korach tonight. B'ezrat Hashem. We're studying the parasha. It's an incredible parasha, jam-packed with many, many, many incredible things to talk about, important points, important lessons to speak about. I think the one big question that everybody's bothered by when you read this parasha, which obviously is the story of Korach, who rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu, the man who took us out of Egypt, the man who gave us the Torah, who brought us the 2 stone tablets. You know, it's so obvious that he is the one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose, and he is the leader of Am Yisrael. It's undisputed. And the big question that everybody wants to know is, how could he do this? How could Korach do this? How could he go and he rebels and says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you're raising yourself above the Jewish people, you are selfish, and you're taking for your family, you give Aaron the position, you give your other cousin the position, you give yourself, you're the king. I mean, how could somebody say this to Moshe Rabbeinu? How could you rebel like this against Moshe Rabbeinu?
Korach was big also.
Korach was big as well. That makes the question even worse. He himself was a Navi. He was the grandfather, great grandfather of Shmuel Navi. It says Tzaddik Katamar Yifrach. Tzaddik. The last letter of Tzaddik is Kuf. Katamar is Reish. Yifrach is Chet. Kuf, Reish, and Chet is Korach. You're talking about a huge man. So the big question, I think, that we have to try and address is what could possibly go through his mind to cause him to do this? That's the big question. And we have certain answers that we find in Chazal, and we also have answers that we find in the later Rishonim and Achronim, and I want to share some of them with you. I want to share some of the Chidushim that I saw every year when you learn the parasha over. You learn new things. That's the beauty of the Torah Kedusha. You always learn new things every year. Every year. So, I want to share with you the Chidushim first, because I found them to be very interesting. The first Chidush is something that I usually find myself talking about in last week's parasha. Last week's parasha, and we're going to shortly mention in this week's parasha as well, the idea about the significance of names. The idea that a name that a person has represents the core, the essence of his neshama. And we usually discuss this concept, not now, but in the previous parasha, in Parashat Shlach. Because in Parashat Shlach, we have a very interesting discussion about the names of the spies. For example, one of the spies' names, remember we just spoke about the spies that came back with the bad report about Israel. One of the spies, his name was Setur ben Michael. The word Setur, the root of that is Satar. So the Gemara in Masechet Satar Daf Lamed tells us Shesatar dvarav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he contradicted the words of Hashem. There was another man, his name was Nachbi ben Vofsi. Nachbi means let us hide something. So says the Gemara, he was hiding the words of Hashem. Hashem said that we're going to be successful. He was hiding it. He didn't want them to hear that. In the name of the person, you see his destiny. It's an amazing thing. Another one over there, it said Machi. There was another person by the name of Machi. Says the Gemara over there that was because he was making Hashem out to be like he was Mach. Mach means weak, Hashem Yishmor. That as if Hashem God is not capable, isn't strong enough to fight off the enemies in the land of Canaan. So each person in his name is embedded his essence, is embedded the core, the neshama of that person. So that's what we see happening in the neshamot. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot, welcome gentlemen. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot tells us, Lechu chazu mifalot elokim asher sham shamot ba'aretz, asher sam shamot ba'aretz. Go see the deeds of Hashem. Welcome. Go see the deeds of Hashem. Asher sam shamot ba'aretz, that Hashem made desolation in the world. Says the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Al tikri shamot ela shemot. Don't read it as desolation, but rather shemot, names, meaning that Hashem puts the name in the mouth of the Father when He gives the name, and that is the name that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has determined that this person should have. That's the Gemara in Masechet Brachot. Asher sam shamot ba'aretz, al tikri shamot ela shemot. Hashem places the name in the mouth of the father when he gives the name to the baby. So over here, very interesting discussion that we have to have. What's going on over here? Here, I have to tell you, I've had this question for a very long time. And usually I have this question not in these parashiot, but rather in Parashat Vayishlach. In Parashat Vayishlach, you see the list of the children and grandchildren of Esav. It gives you a long list. Esav, as you know, is the son of Yaakov, and he was a wicked man, unfortunately, and he gave birth to wicked children.
Was brother of Yaakov.
I'm sorry, the son of Yitzchak, I meant to say, the brother of Yaakov. Correct. Thank you. So he was the brother of Yaakov, son of Yitzchak. He gave birth to wicked children, and he gave birth to children that went in very evil ways, and his grandchildren weren't great either. So look at what the pasuk tells us. It says like this: "Ve'olibama yalda et Yeush ve'et Ya'alam ve'et Korach." Esav had a wife. Her name was Aholibama. Aholibama gave birth to Yeush. She gave birth to Ya'alam. And she gave birth to Korach.
Korach was a grandchild of Esav?
No, so there was a man, there was a son of Esav. Esav had a son by the name of Korach. Now there's a famous pasuk in Mishlei. The pasuk in Mishlei says, Zecher tzadik livracha, v'shem reshaim yirkav, which means that the memory of a tzaddik is a blessing. People always want to name their children after a tzaddik because his memory is a blessing. But the name of a rasha, it rots away. You know why it rots away? What happens when you don't touch something, when you leave it there? It just rots, it goes bad.
Or
so then, yeah, or it gets dust, right? So when something it's a living thing, it goes bad, it gets rotten. V'shem Rashaim Yirkav, says Rashi, because people will never want to name their child after rasha. They don't want the child to have a bad essence, a bad core. So I've always exactly. You know, it drives me nuts. Sometimes you hear kids, especially Israelis. I don't know why. I don't know what came over them. They call their kid Nimrod. You know, Nimrod was one of the most wicked people. He threw Abraham Avinu into the fire. And he said, "What were they thinking?" Nimrod. So over here, he was a king. Okay, good. But he was wicked. He was Rasha. But my point is, gentlemen, like this. We have to understand over here, this is not unlearned people. Over here, gentlemen, we're talking about Levi. Levi had a son by the name of Kehat. Kehat had a son by the name of Yitzhar. Yitzhar had a son, Korach. What was he thinking? You know, it's every time that we read Parashat Vayishlach, I read this and I say to myself, Esav has a son, Korach. Why so many years later did Yitzhar go ahead and name his own son Korach?
Maybe he didn't pay attention or something.
It's a very hard thing to fathom. He goes and names his son Korach. Okay, gentlemen, so this is the question that I've always had. And this time around, when I was studying the parasha, I saw for the first time that I'm not alone. somebody else asked this question, but not just somebody else. The Khatam Sofer himself. And he says something very powerful. He says that I don't understand how they could possibly name their child Korach. How could they do such a thing? The Bnei Levi, these are holy people. What were they thinking? Says the Khatam Sofer. Everything that happened to Korach, everything that happened to him, that he rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu was the father of all prophets, and he still managed to somehow decide to rebel against him. All of that was due to the fact that his name was Korach, named after an Adam Rasha.
Wow.
That's what the Khatam Sofer says.
Can a name ever be redeemed?
I'm sorry?
Can a name ever be redeemed?
It could be changed.
No, not changed.
Oh, yes, that's a good question. You're asking if a name could be redeemed. That's a good question. Yes, I'm gonna explain that the answer to that is yes. We're gonna talk about that shortly. Okay, we're gonna
In
get
the
to that.
Gemara, we find Rabbi Yishmael many times, because unless you argue maybe that he did tshuva later on.
Oh, that's right, Dr. Chaz. That's exactly what I was going to tell you. That Rabbi Yishmael is a good name because at the end of his life he did tshuva. Correct. Yishmael did tshuva. I believe that's correct. Excellent point, Dr. Chado. Okay, so let's continue. So over here we find in the Gemara, amen. We find in the Gemara Masechet Yuma Daf Pei Gimel. I want to focus on this a little bit. The Gemara tells us a very interesting story. The story was with three of the greatest Tanaim. It was Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Meir Balanes, that they were traveling, and they needed to stay overnight in an inn. The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi were not accustomed to verifying names of people and checking people out based on their names. But Rabbi Meir Balanes was. So he said, when they got to the inn, he asked the innkeeper, "What's your name?" And the innkeeper said, "My name is Kidol." Rabbi Meir said to his two colleagues at that moment, "You should know this guy's a Rasha. He's a wicked man." So they didn't make much of it. It's Kidol. Why is that a wicked name? It's because the pasuk in Ha'azinu says, Kidor ta'puchot hema, that the Jewish people are a nation of rebellion. They turn everything upside down. They don't keep everything straight. They're twisted, Hashem Yishmo. So that's a bad thing, because you should know this guy's a Rashat. So they didn't make much of it. They gave their wallets to him. And Rabbi Meir Balanes did not. They thought he's going to keep it safe, and they gave it to him. Okay. Rabbi Meir needed a place to put it, so he put it by the grave of the father of this man, Kidol. He put it by, there was a cemetery not far, and he put it by that grave. He figured over there it's safe. Interestingly enough, this man, Kidol, had a dream that night with his father coming to him and telling him that somebody left his wallet by my grave. Go get it. That's what he told him. His father came to him in a dream and told him that. So what happened was that he actually ended up telling the rabbis this dream, and they said, yeah, dreams that happen like sunset time, you don't have to worry about them. They're nonsense. At any rate, Rabbi Meir was very worried about it, and he stood by the grave and he watched over his purse, his wallet the whole time. The following day, as they're getting ready to leave, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi go ahead and they ask for their wallets back. The guy goes, "You never gave me your wallet. You never gave it to me. I don't know what you're talking about." And they couldn't get it back. Rabbi Meir had his wallet because he never gave it to the guy to begin with. So they had to devise a plan. So they got the guy very drunk. They got him very intoxicated, and they had noticed that he ate lentils. He had some leftover lentils on his mustache. And they went to his wife and they told his wife, your husband, he had lentils, right? You fed him lentils for supper. She said, yes. He just told us that you should give us back our wallets. He said, really? He said, yeah. How else would we know that he had lentils? He just told us himself. So, okay. She gave him the wallets, and then he got sober, and he goes and he realizes what happened, and he killed his wife.
They took advantage of it.
He killed his own wife because he was so upset that she did that she gave back the wallets to the two rabbis. What you see here is an amazing thing. Here's a man that just by his name, they were able to, Rabbi Meir Balanes was able to tell that this guy is a thief and a murderer on the spot, just by the guy's name. It's a scary thing. So we see that there is a lot of significance to a name, like this Gemara tells us. And they said to him, how come if you knew this was the case, how come you didn't tell us that this was definitely going to happen? He said, listen, I don't know that's definitely going to happen. It's a hint. It's something that it's a probability, but it doesn't mean for sure it's going to happen. So that's why I didn't tell you that it's 100%. It does have a lot.
They took advantage of it.
There's an interesting Gemara in Masechet Ketubot, Daf Kuf Daled. The Gemara over there says there were two judges in Yerushalayim. One judge, his name was Hanan ben Avshalom. Now the problem here is Hanan ben Avshalom. Hanan sounds good, but Avshalom was the son of David that rebelled against him. So how could they have named him? How could they have named that man Avshalom? That's funny. Nowadays in Israel, there are a lot of Avshaloms. It's an interesting thing. But Tosfot is bothered. How could they name the guy Avshalom, the son that rebelled against King David? How could they name him that? So the Tosfot says it must be his name was Avishalom. They had an extra yud. He says in the different books we looked at, there's a yud in that name, Avishalom. Now, funny enough, there's a very interesting question that's asked about naming somebody Shaul. Shaul, we know, was the king of Israel. But there was another man before Shaul in the Torah named Shaul. Now, Shaul, who came before Shaul HaMelech, was a man by the name of Shaul ben HaKnaanit. Shaul ben HaKnaanit, according to some Mefarshim, is actually another name for Zimri ben Salu, who was the leader of the tribe of Shimon that had relations with Zimri bat Kozbi. Because of this man, 24,000 people were killed. So everybody asks, how could they name Shaul? Shaul, if because of that individual who he's named after, we lost 24,000 people in Klal Yisrael because of the wicked act that he did. So this is to address your question. So the answer that is given is a very interesting answer. The truth is that there's even someone before him that was named Shaul. Even before Shaul ben HaKnaanit, who was the son of Shimon, there was somebody even before him who was also named Shaul. And that was one of the kings of the East that's brought down in the Torah, Shaul Mirchovot HaNahar. It's an amazing thing. I always wondered, there's certain historical points that are brought down in the Torah, in Sefer Bereshit, which you read them and you ask yourself, why on earth does the Torah have to bring these things down? It gives you lists of kings that have nothing to do with the Jewish people. Like there's a woman named, there was a guy named Matred Bat Mei Zahav, who was a king. Who cares? It's like the most interesting. Why does the Torah have to tell us these things about kings of foreign countries? So over here, I saw a beautiful answer. Shaul Merchovot HaNahar was a king after somebody else by the name of Hanan ben Achbor. Hanan ben Achbor. Very interesting name. Hanan, the son of Achbor. These are very interesting names. But look at how to learn a Tosfot. Comes along the great Rabbi Yehuda Asad in Shelot Utshuvot Yehuda Ya'aleh, and he says a very interesting thing. He says the Tosfot that we just spoke about before had a question about a judge by the name of Hanan ben Avshalom. The only problem that they had was with the name Avshalom, because that's the rebellious son of King David. They did not have any problem with the name Hanan. Who was Hanan in the Torah? This random king, Hanan ben Achbor, who was in a different country. So what do you see? If the Tosfot didn't have any problem with that king's name, it must be that king was a righteous Gentile. That means that the list of kings from that country is a reference to righteous Gentiles. So the next king who came after him, Shaul from Rechovot Hanahar, who was in the same country as that king Hanan ben Achbor, was also a righteous Gentile. So here you see something interesting, that if you have two people with the same name, one is wicked and one is a tzaddik, you could still use the name. You understand? You had two people here. One was Shaul ben Aknanit, which was another name for Zimri, who was the leader of the tribe of Shimon that brought about the death of 24,000 people. But then there was another man named Shaul. And Shaul was from Rechovot HaNahar, but he was a righteous Gentile king who kept the 7 Noachide laws. And therefore, you see, says Rabbi Yehuda Asad, one of the great Achronim, he says, you see from here that there's no problem to name King Shaul, because since two people before him both shared the same name, even though one was a Rasha, but since one was a Tzaddik, the name is good. You legitimize the huh?
I will not take the risk.
You wouldn't take the risk. But it's an interesting cheshbon, l'chaim.
But Shaul HaMelech was a good king. He's a good king who.
Shaul HaMelech was a good king in the beginning, but unfortunately he took a wrong turn afterwards. So Rabotai, so the first question that we had, the first answer that we had to the question is, believe it or not, the problem with Korach was his name. That's the Khatam Sofer. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. That's what he says. He says the name Korach is what did him in. Okay. Now, the next answer that I want to share with you. The Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin. Yes.
You have no choice for the name. We can be born, you know.
You could do certain things. No, you could do certain things. Like if somebody, God forbid,
someone decide for us that.
Let's say, God forbid, somebody is ill. They add a name. Chaim, Chai, Chaya, right? It's possible to add a name, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
After.
Sure. It's also possible to change a name. There was a story not too long ago, maybe 9-10 years ago in Baltimore, that there was a very well-meaning man. He had a baby boy, and he got up in the shul in Baltimore, and at the naming, V'kareh Shmo B'Yisrael, Arizal. Arizal means Ari is Rabbeinu Yitzchak Luria, but Ari stands for Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak. Zal is Zichrono Livracha. So they named their baby Arizal. Zichrono means a blessed memory, So you don't name. So Rav Heinemann, may he live and be well, was there at the Brit Milah, and he got up and he told everybody the name of the baby is Yitzchak, and he's named after the Arizal. But because he got up publicly and changed the name, so that's how it works. You could change the name like that. You can add a name like that as well.
By the way, I heard that if somebody called and you call him, for example, Yitzhak, and then you call him in something close to Yitzhak, not exactly Yitzhak, different name. He's not allowed to do that too.
Not allowed to, like a nickname, you mean?
No, not nickname. Even for somebody by I born and by they call me Yosef.
Okay.
And people now sometimes call me Yosef. Allowed to do that?
Because it's a nickname. It's a way of showing love, no? I thought it's a way of showing love.
By the way, I was calling my kid Yosef when he was a kid, and then I changed it to his name. I brought his name back, and now we call him Yosef only.
Okay, beautiful.
I heard if you give your kid 2 or 3 names, you have to call them by the full name.
Yeah, you should call him. You should use all the names. I've heard that as well. Yeah. Okay, gentlemen. The next. I'm sorry.
Why not let them not give the name? Like I see people that are
That name has no halachic significance, except as far as if they need for a ketubah or for a get or something. All right, gentlemen, come, let's go. The next answer that the Gemara gives is the following: what caused Korach to do this wild thing, to rebel against Moshe? So the Gemara tells us in Masechet Sanhedrin, Kuf Yud, There's something called Osher Shamur Liba'alav Lerato. Okay, which means wealth that is held for a person to his detriment. Osher Shamur Liba'alav, wealth which is held for a person Lerato, to his detriment, to work against him. This is a very interesting story. The Gemara tells us over there that that this refers to Oshro Shel Korach. This refers to the wealth of Korach. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Ze mamono shel adam shema'amido al raglav. Amar Rabbi Levi, Masui gimel meot pradot levanot hayu maftechot shel bet knazav shel Korach. Rabbi Levi teaches us in that Gemara over there that there were 300 horses, or donkeys rather, white donkeys, that would carry the keys to the treasure chests of Korach. And all of them were keys and locks that were made out of leather, says the Gemara. In other words, the wealth that this man had amassed was tremendous. And over here, the Gemara tells us that because of that wealth, because of his incredible wealth, this is what caused him to fail. Now let's explain that a little bit further. Ben Ish Chai over here says something pretty amazing, but he starts off with the continuation of the Gemara. It says the following: Amar Rav Chama Rabbi Chanina. Chama, the son of Rabbi Chanina, teaches us, Shalosh matmoniot hitmin Yosef b'Mitzrayim. There were 3 treasures that Yosef hid in Egypt. Yosef, that was the viceroy of Egypt, that had sold all of the barley that the grains that the Egyptians had collected in the 7 years of plenty to the Egyptians, getting from them all of their silver, all of their gold, all of their money, all of their property. So with all of that, Yosef took it and divided it up into 3 separate treasures. This is what the Gemara tells us. A very interesting thing. Now, one of them was revealed to Korach, and Korach took it, and that's how he made all of his wealth. He found one of the treasures that Yosef had hidden. One of them was revealed to Antoninus, the Roman emperor, many, many years later, hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years later, to Antoninus. And the other one, says the Gemara, is Gnuzal Tzadikim Le'atid Lavo. It's going to be revealed to the Tzadikim at the end of days. Now, comes along the Ben Ish Chai and says something really amazing. He says, each one of these 3 treasures was sourced from different people. He says there was, and this all happened miraculously. It was sorted and sifted out based on who was the giver of the money. Meaning, Yosef intentionally divided the money into 3 separate treasures because he wanted there to be one box that was money that came from idol worshippers, from idolaters, that it should go into one box. Then he wanted that the money that should come from people that are not idolaters, but they are people that have unfortunately stolen money, not money that's all 100%. They're not idolaters, but they have money that's not 100% kosher. It's stolen a little bit. Some of it doesn't belong to them. That money should go into a second box. And then he wanted a third box with money that has no idolatry, and it's all kosher people who keep all the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach, the sons of Noach, to go into a third box. This is how the Ben Ish Chai explains that Gemara over there in Ben Yehoyada. He says Korach found the treasure with the money that came from all the idolaters. It was treif money. Because the money that he got was so drenched in tum'ah that when it took a hold of his life, it led him in the totally wrong direction. That's how the Ben Ish Chai explains it.
It's uncleansable?
Uncleansable. Not able to become holy. And therefore took him straight down. It means that there's a certain understanding that when somebody unfortunately is so entrenched in impurity, that has an effect on the money that's in his hand. And therefore, whoever comes in contact with him, there's a problem with that money. It's an interesting thing. Matter of fact, the whole beginning of Masechet Avodah Zarah talks about how a few days before the holiday of the Goyim, one technically shouldn't do business with them for certain reasons. They might come to thank their God. They might come to do all kinds of things that would increase idol worship. So therefore, we have to stay away. It's an interesting concept.
Rabbi, that's why some rabbis they don't shake maybe hands because
The guy's wicked, the guy.
That's a different story. But the point is, I'm talking now over here about an idea that the money that Korach had brought about his downfall. We asked the question, what could cause somebody to go against Moshe Rabbeinu? What could bring somebody? You have to be out of your mind. This is the man. This is the man that brought us out of Egypt. What could bring you to do something like that? Says the Gemara, it was the money. The Beis Chai says the reason that it was the money was because this was money from idolaters. Others learn when the Gemara says it was the money, the idea is, the Maharsha says a little differently, he says the idea is that when a person has so much money, like Korach, again, it was a tremendous amount of money, tremendous. So now all of a sudden he looks at himself and he says, here I am, Mr. Hotshot. I'm on top of the world. I have so much money. And instead of me being the king, instead of me being the Kohen Gadol, they gave it to these guys. Who are they? Do they have my money? They don't come close to my money. So the minute that he has that money, he feels like the honor is supposed to come to him.
Are you sure it's not empty?
Yeah. Well, no, that's a different answer. That's a beautiful answer, different answer. But I'm giving you what the Gemara says now in Masechet Sanhedrin. It says over here that the money is what brought about his downfall. So it's an important thing to understand that this is something that was really, really powerful. Now we have to be aware that sometimes a person can really fail because of his money. It could cause a person to be very arrogant. It could cause a person to be very, look at me. And therefore, he can do something very bad. Okay, like becoming a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu, which is unfathomable. It's fathomable. Somebody with enough money that feels like he's in power, he's in control, that's what happens. Very important.
They were really big. Korach was really Talmud Chacham.
He was. That's what makes it all the more powerful. That here you have somebody that's a righteous man, and I'll share with you another amazing thing that I saw. The Sat Merav, the Divrei Yoel, the Sat Merav. Listen to this, amazing. The Divrei Yoel had a grandfather named the Yitav Lev. The Yitav Lev's grandfather was a man by the name of Rav Moshe Teitelbaum, the Yismach Moshe. The Yismach Moshe was a very, very holy man, holy Rebbe. And the Yitav Lev, his grandson, writes that he spoke to his grandfather, the Yismach Moshe. And the Yismach Moshe said about himself that he remembers 3 of his past lives. 3 of his past lives. He says one of his past lives was in the desert at the time of the rebellion of Korach versus Moshe. So he says his grandson, the Yitav Lev, asked him, whose side were you on? He said, I was neutral. He says, what do you mean? He says, you don't understand. If you would have been there and you would have seen Korach, it was very tempting to join his rebellion. You couldn't tell who's right and who's wrong. Here's Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's obviously the Gedol Hador, but here's Korach, and he also looks like the Gedol Hador. He wasn't sure whose side to be on. An amazing thing. He stayed neutral. He said, I'm staying out of it. I'm not getting involved.
People made a mistake.
People made the mistake, but my point is that it wasn't clear. It wasn't the easy thing. You're looking at it as if it's so easy to figure out the answer of whose side was the right side. People didn't know what to do. He was saying, I didn't know what to do. An amazing thing. So that's with respect to the money. So even somebody that was on such a level that people were looking at him like the Gedol Hador, and he's such a Talmid Chacham, and so this and that. But bottom line is, the money killed him. It just rotted at him. It rotted away at him. It brought him to such, but it got him to such a high level of ego that it just took away his sanity. That's answer number 2. And answer number 3, definitely not the last, but it's an important answer to talk about, is it was his wife. Always blame the wife, right? It was her, right? What does that mean? Amazing thing. It says that Korach was not necessarily planning a rebellion, but his wife incited him. And she told him, she says, I don't understand you. Here's this man, and this man Moshe, he's the king. So, okay, he became the king. Fine, let's say. But his brother, he gave him the position of Kohen Gadol. Okay, he gave him the position. His brother's children are the Kohanim for all future generations. So we see over here that he's, taking for himself, for his family. And what about you? Let me tell you about you. He says, don't you remember the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar? Don't you remember what happened? He took all of you guys, the tribe of Levi, and he made you guys shave off all your hair on your body. That's what it says. They had to remove all the hair on their body. Why do you think he's doing that to you? Because he wants to humiliate you. He wants you to look like imbeciles. Who does that? So he's taking all of you, tribe of Levi, and he's making you shave everything on your bodies so that you look bad. So Korach said to his wife, but honey, he's also from Levi, and he also had to shave himself. So it's not just us that he did it to, he did it to himself too. Says his wife to Korach, she says, yeah, but that's called Tamut Nafshim Plishtim. You know what that means? Tamut Nafshim Plishtim is when Shimshon Gibor was at his last moment. Shimshon was one of the Shoftim, and he was conquered by the Plishtim, who he was their sworn enemy. He killed many of the Plishtim, which was a group that lived on the shore of Gaza. And he was there, and they captured him. He asked from Hashem for his last final strength. He should be able to knock down the columns that he had, that he was tied down to, and that way the whole building will collapse on everybody. He said, Tamut nafshi im plishtim. May my soul die together with them, even though it means I'm committing suicide, but I'd rather at least die with all of them together. They should all die too. So she said, yeah, of course he'll shave himself. He doesn't mind shaving himself. Once he's got all of you listening to him, so then he doesn't mind to shave himself too, as long as you listen to what he has to say. So she incited him against Moshe. She got him to work against Moshe to rebel. Amazing thing. Now, that's a powerful statement. That means is that sometimes a person can have a wife that is completely leading him, sending him to the lions.
That's me. Don't listen to your wife.
I didn't say that. 1 second. We have to reach a conclusion about the subject. It's a good question, but we have to bring up another counter argument. Yossi, we have to bring up another counter argument. Listen carefully. So over here we see that it's possible that a wife can lead a person to his devastation. She said to him a final argument. She said to him, he tells you that you have to wear tzitzit. And on the tzitzit, there should be a string that's blue, tchelet. He says, I don't understand. If he thinks that a blue string should be enough to make, people holy or what have you, so then make the whole talit blue. Make the whole talit blue. Everybody should wear blue talitot. She said, you see that this is all flawed logic. It's not coming from Hashem. It's all fake. And you will be a real, you'll do things properly. You'll be a good leader, direct from Hashem. So she told him that the whole thing is really wrong. Now, there's a pasuk in Tehillim, Mishlei, that says the following: Chachmot nashim banta beita veivelet beyadea tehersenu, which means the wisest of women build their house, but a woman who is wicked, she destroys her house. So over here says the Gemara that there was in the very same rebellion of Korach, we said that there were a bunch of other people that were added on the list as well. One was Datan, one was Aviram, and then there was another man by the name of On ben Pelet. On ben Pelet was also part of the rebellion. And the Gemara tells us, and look at the discussion that this woman had with her husband. his wife, On Ben Pellet's wife, told him, "What are you doing with this rebellion? What difference does it make to you? Think about it. Let's say Moshe wins, you're still a loser. Let's say Korach wins, you're still a loser. You gain nothing from this whole thing." And he said, "But I swore to them that I'm coming to the rebellion. If they need me, I'll come. I promised them."
None of these men were single?
Huh?
None of these men were single?
No. So she said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." She got him drunk and she made him fall asleep. And then when they came to get him, she was outside of the tent and she uncovered her hair and she behaved immodestly next to these people who were all kulam kadoshim, like it says. They were all holy people. They said, "Oh my gosh, we can't have anything to do with this guy." And she saved him. So over here you see an incredible idea that in the very same moment that you have one wife who's destroying her husband's life and her husband's family and getting him killed, you also have a woman who's saving her husband, who's taking her husband and removing him from something which is devastating. Abotai, this is actually a very important point to talk about. Sometimes a wife can do something that is unbelievable and can be the most amazing thing. Sometimes she could bring about death. Chava gave the fruit to Adam and caused him to die. He was supposed to live for all eternity, and he because of her, he died. You have on the other hand Sarai Imenu, who told Avraham to get rid of Ishmael from the house, and Hashem said, "Whatever she tells you, listen." Right? You had also Miriam, the daughter of Amram and Yocheved, that Amram, the father of Moshe, divorced Yocheved because of the fact that all the babies were being thrown into the river. And Miriam told her father, "Your decree is worse than Paro. Paro only decreed against the males that they should be thrown into the river. But by you not having relations with your wife, by you separating from your wife, now you're not even bringing females into the world, and everybody's going to follow you, and nobody's going to have any children at all." So because of her, Amram listened to his daughter, to Miriam. He got married again to Yocheved, to his wife, and he had Moshe Rabbeinu. So listening to her actually brought about the salvation of the whole Jewish nation and got us the Torah and got us everything. So here you have, again, some situations, you see that it's the very wise thing to listen to your wife. Some situations, it's very wrong. So the question obviously becomes, at what point are you supposed to listen? And at what point are you not supposed to listen? This is the big question. Do you agree it's a good question?
Yeah.
What do you think? Sort of the question? Okay. I saw an attempt to answer the question. I saw in a sefer called the Psikta Zutra. He says the following. He says, when it comes to anything that, and again, I'm not saying that this is the best answer, but I'm saying this is an answer. We'll try and give another one too. It says, when it comes to spiritual matters, don't listen to it. That's your domain. Spiritual matters could be that she's going to be a little bit cheap on the tefillin. Maybe she's going to say it's not, why do you have to spend that much money on it? Or things like that. It could be that her attitude will be a little bit not as generous when it comes to spiritual matters. Maybe she'll want you home more often and not go to learn as much. Different things. Spiritually, this Sikta Zutrita suggests you should make the decision on your own. But when it comes to other things, let's say if you need advice regarding certain situations, certain people, certain things like that you should go and get her advice and make sure that you follow what she says. It says, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was 18 years old. They asked him to become the head of the Sanhedrin. He wouldn't do it unless he spoke to his wife. He said, "I'm not doing nothing. I'm not saying yes until I ask her what she said." You have to have permission from your wife. If you're going to take on a huge position like that, like becoming the head of the Sanhedrin, you have to have permission from your wife. Very interesting story with Rav Pam. Rav Pam was asked to be on the head of the Torah Sages Council of America. He didn't want to. He was a Rosh Yeshiva, he was a rabbi, he was happy with his job. And they said, please do it. But he had no choice but to take the job. At a certain point, his wife was upset. She said, I married a Rosh Yeshiva, not a politician. You know, and sometimes when you get too much involved in the work of the klal, it gets taxing and you don't get to learn as much. But the point is, so that's his approach. The other answer that I saw, Rabotai, is very plain and simple. You just have to use your good judgment. Sometimes she's going to have what to say that is, maybe, what?
Best answer.
Yeah, that's like this, and sometimes it's going to be like that. There is no one size fits all answer, and you have to use your good judgment. But Rabotai, it's very important to understand that without properly weighing things, and all of a sudden you see that you have this advice from her, and it could be the devastation of the entire family and the entire klal Yisrael. Everything could be a disaster. It's scary how bad it could be, but on the other hand, it could save the person as well. So that's what this pasuk is telling us. Chachmot nashim banta beita v'ivelet be'adea tehersenu. It could be in both directions. Okay, now gentlemen, I want to just share with you one last point, which I think is important to talk about. The Arizal tells us that there's actually a lot more, a lot deeper of a matter going on over here. And that is the following. As you know, the Arizal teaches us that Cain was actually reincarnated into two other people. Cain was reincarnated, if you remember Cain from the story of Cain and Hevel. Yeah. So he was reincarnated first into the body of the Egyptian that Moshe Rabbeinu killed. Remember in Parashat Shmot, Moshe Rabbeinu killed an Egyptian man that was hitting a Jew. Cain was reincarnated into that Egyptian. After that Egyptian died, he was then reincarnated into Korach. So Korach actually is a Gilgul of Cain. Okay? Very interesting thing. Now, not only that, because we had to go through a couple of chances for the tikkun. Now, besides for that, Moshe Rabbeinu, says the Ari HaKadosh, was also a Gilgul. He was a Gilgul of Hevel. Hevel was, in English they say Abel. Now, as you know, Cain, in the famous story, killed Hevel. Cain killed Hevel. Now, over there in the story, it tells us that Hashem asks Cain, where's your brother? After Cain killed Hevel. And he says, my brother's watch, my brother's keeper, do I have to watch over him? And exactly. So he says back, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says back to him, what are you saying? The land is cursed now because of you, right? Asher patzta et pia, that the land opened up its mouth to swallow up the brother of the blood of your brother. Your brother's blood is screaming out from the ground. So over here, says the Shalah Kadosh, based on this teaching of the Ari, you have to ask yourself an interesting question. Why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu says, if Hashem is with Korach, let Hashem accept the offering of Korach. But if Hashem is not with Korach, then Hashem will create a creation that will cause this massive sinkhole to come into the ground, to fall into the ground, and Korach will die that way. Why did he do that? What was the purpose of that? Exactly. Because Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he was Hevel, and that Cain was, his Gilgul was in Korach, and therefore Moshe caused the same ground that swallowed up his blood when he was Hevel is now going to swallow up Korach alive. Midah keneged midah. So over here, we're asking again the same question. What could possibly cause Korach to go and rebel against Moshe? Now we have a fourth answer. The fourth answer is Cain always had jealousy of Hevel. Where did the jealousy come from? It says a very interesting thing in Parashat Bereshit. it says when Hashem spoke to Chava and said, why did you eat from the fruit? So it says that Chava said, Hanachash hishi'ani v'ochel. The Nachash tricked me and I ate. But the Gemara in Masechet Sotah says the word hishi'ani is the same root word of hisiani, which means nisuin, marriage. The Nachash married me. Says the Gemara, the Nachash actually had relations with Chava and put some of his venom, so to say, which is in the form of seed, into her. Says the Ari HaKadosh. So why did he have that feeling for her? Because the Gemara rather says that he saw Adam and Chava together, and then he desired Chava. When Adam and Chava were together, they had Cain. They had Hevel rather. When the Nachash was with Chava, he had Cain with her. So really, Cain was the son of the Nachash, believe it or not. So the jealousy that the Nachash had for Chava, Cain had for Hevel. Hevel is bringing this amazing offering, and I'm not, and Hashem is loving what Hevel is doing and not me, so I have jealousy from Hevel.
Cain was the Bechor.
Cain was the Bechor, very good.
So if Cain was the Bechor, first of all, Adam was with Chava, not...
So it's interesting. So it says that it's like when you put something into a tube, right? The first one that you put in, if you put two things into a tube, right? You put one, you put two, which one comes out first? No, the second one, because you put, you understand?
Two.
Yeah. The second one will come out first. So he ended up being the one from the Nachash. But the point is, exactly, correct. So over here we see a very amazing point. The Nachash had a lust for Chava and was jealous of Adam. Cain had this jealousy for Hevel. Now, amazing, when he came back as the Egyptian desired somebody else's wife, right? Shlomit bat Divri. And now he comes back again as Korach, and he's desiring the position of Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron. So that's his problem. That's his tikkun, that jealousy that he always has. That was his job. And he was supposed to fix it. But he failed. So therefore, he got swallowed up. But that was part of his tikkun. But my point is, Amutai, that there's so much more than what meets the eye. There's a jealousy that's embedded in this man's neshama from generation to generation. And it's so much more than what we see.
Why does Hashem allow Cain to reincarnate?
Kodesh Baruch Hu gives opportunities to do that so that people can fix themselves.
To repent.
Exactly, to change what they messed up, to change how they did things wrong. Okay, gentlemen, we'll stop over here. Chazakim Bruchim. Thank you very much to Mr. Saidian and Mrs. Saidian. And just one last word about this parasha, which I think we have to mention. I'm sorry to keep you a little bit longer, but just one last thing. Remember this. I always say this every year. The word Korach had a machloket. Machloket is the same letters as, remembers? Chelek Mavet.
Wow.
Chelek, turn around the letters. Machloket, same letters as Chelek Mavet, a portion of death. Remember, guys, avoid machloket like the plague. Avoid arguments, avoid fights like the plague. Give in. Keep your mouth shut. Don't have any fights. Don't allow yourself to get involved in a fight with anybody. Be mivater. Let go. No fighting. It's asur. It's asur according to Torah. And everybody, when there's a fight, everybody thinks they're right. And how am I not supposed to defend myself? And how am I not supposed to this? But guess what? When you keep on doing that, you keep the fight going. The Torah says that anybody who keeps the fight going is in violation of Allah. That you shall not be like Korach and his rebellion. It's asur to keep a fight going. Immediately end it. It's not worth it. It's chelek mavet. It's a portion of death. Look what happened to Korach. He died, literally. So we don't want that. We don't want death or a portion of death. We want to give in. We want to let go. No fights. No anger. It's asur. Remember that. Every year we talk about Korach. We must talk. We must talk about these things. Chazakim B'Kim.